Good evening, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. We're going to continue our examination of TurretinFan's response concerning Revelation 16:5 by Nick Sayers, and this is part 26. And so we are in the eternal loop of TurretinFan responses here, and so it's a bit like Inception. TurretinFan does 5 minutes of video, and I end up doing an hour to come against or agree or whatever I'm doing with what he's saying. And so, but I feel like I'm in a little bit of a time loop just trying to catch up with all these. But we are getting there, and eventually we will move on to other things. But I thought, well, I may as well do another video and go through some of this stuff. So let's begin where we left off last time. So TurretinFan is on his 19th video in this one. So this is a 3-week-old video already because we're trying to play catch-up. And so let's let TurretinFan start responding. Now, I think he is showing video clips of me talking. Now, the video clips are very low in volume. So what I'm doing is I'm just sort of turning the volume up as much as I feel is necessary, which is a little bit unfortunate because it could just boom in your ear. And so, yeah, you'll just have to make do with that because I usually don't have much of a booming sound coming out of my system, or I was wearing headphones, but I found that sometimes that muddled things up. And so, yeah, I don't know exactly how loud it is. I have a 70% of an idea, but yeah, I'm just basically just going off the little YouTube slide here. So let's just begin.
Before, the area I've somewhat passed over has been Beza's notes itself, and I wanted to go ahead and share and discuss those notes.
So just to let you know, I do have 2 fans on me. We have a huge storm here, electrical thunderstorm, and it gets quite humid here in Australia. And so I've got the window open, got these fans, but it might pour with rain, and we might even get cut off. It might be one of those type of storms, but we'll just see.
If I can, I think I can. So what we have here is lots of Latin. This is Beza's notes. So Theodore Beza's annotations at Revelation 1:4, 1:8, 4:8, 11:17, and 16:5. Now these are the places where God is described as being the one who is and who was, or who was and who is.
And so this is great. This is exactly what I've been asking people to do, to go through Revelation 1:4 specifically, and also the other places, and come to their own conclusions, and to look at what Theodore Beza said about these issues.
And then in 1:4 and 1:8, he's also said to be the one who is to come, as he is also in 4:8. But now in 4:8, it's who was and is to come. In 1:4 and 1:8, it's who is and was and is to come. Then in 11:17, it's actually just who is and was, but the Greek text that Beza is using has added who is to come there. And then 16:5 has who was and is, O Holy One. And Beza sees this as problematic because for Beza, there's 5 different places that have this similar phrase. 4 of them are the same, and the fifth one looks incomplete to him. So, but let's hear what he actually has to say. And I think the logical way to do this is to start with his comments on Revelation 1:4, and we'll go through this translation of what he has to say here, which I think is a little bit better than what Nick had been working with. But anyway, we'll see. Now, I don't think Nick in his book offered any translation of 1:4.
And so that's where I would really appreciate. I appreciate TurretinFan for doing this, but I would appreciate if this is his own translation to say so. If it's from a book somewhere, to let me know so I can double check it, and also be prepared for bias, because when we look at Jan Kranz, whenever I read his material, because I know of a lot of the anecdotes that he brings forward, you can tell he's trying to squeeze those type of anecdotes into his translation, which, it's like reading the Jehovah's Witness translation of the Bible, and you can tell they're trying to make out Jesus is a little God and Jehovah is the big God and all this sort of stuff. And you can sense that type of squeezing. And so with Jan Kranz, to a much lesser extent, I'm not saying he's like a Jehovah's Witness, but in his books, he is trying to paint Beza and Erasmus in a certain light. And I find, he admits in his footnote that he does this, that he translates different to Erica Rummel because of what he likes and what he doesn't like.
He may have had one and it just wasn't ready for print or something like that. I'm not sure. In any event, from the one who is, etc., and I'll skip over the Greek and Hebrew words here just to save your ears from my horrible pronunciation. Let no one be surprised that the construction is irregular. Now, this is something that had been noted by Valla before Erasmus printed the New Testament. We'll perhaps do another episode specifically on Valla and Erasmus and Beza.
I feel like I've gone through this. I really do hate this when I'm trying to find the exact video that I was refuting. Sometimes in my rush to do so, I can skip over. Okay, so I'm going to have to go to video number 25. Okay, look at the last section of that. He's going through Cyril of Alexandria. Actually, I'm on the 37-minute mark, which is exactly this. But I feel like I've gone through this. I guess perhaps I have. Part 19 in question mark. Yep, that's what I was looking at last time. Anyway. Deja vu. I think I actually went through it. Anyway.
But Valla had noticed this issue, and he had put it in his notes. Erasmus published what Valla had to say, and then subsequently, Erasmus published the Greek New Testament and had his own annotations about this. We're not going to get into all of that now. Suffice to say that Beza is aware that this is an issue. This construction, the grammatical construction here at Revelation 1:4, is what some people would call a solipsism. It's an irregularity of construction. He says it must be understood that the apostle wished to express what's written in Exodus 3:14, where the Lord, speaking to Moses, asked for his name. Say, he says to the Israelites, I am, I was, and I will be, has sent me to you. So that's how he's translating what it is that God said. So he says that God described himself as I am, I was, and I will be. For the most learned of the Hebrews reports.
So I don't think like this also is it's kind of muddied with this translation actually. Now just think about what it's saying here. It says he asked where the Lord speaking to Moses asked for his name, say, he says to the Israelites, that is, I am, I was, and I will be. And so I think, TurretinFan needs to slow down and go, okay, Nick's written a whole lot about I am, will be, shall be, future form. So the I am equals the is, was, and will be concept. The past, present, and the future. And so here it's interesting because it says that is, I am, I was, I will be. And so I'm not sure. So this is the problem with this translation. I'm not sure where it's from. I'm not sure how we can double check this, which is a shame. And I guess the more translations we get, though, the better we will be able to come up with a final solution for these annotations, because sometimes we have Jeff Riddle throwing in his bit, and TurretinFan's throwing in his bit, and Young Grants, and eventually you sort of come around to what's being said here. But let's just keep going.
Report, and indeed the Talmudists themselves, that the word, and here's a transliteration, I suppose, but it's in Beza's Latin, it's just like this, E-H-E-I-E, encompasses 3 times, present, past, and future. And by it, the perfect and complete stability of God in all respects is signified. In other words,
if you have just the past and present, it's unbalanced. Like his text has, it's like, okay.
God's the same yesterday, today, and forever, as we see elsewhere in Scripture. But who could have expressed this with a single word? So he's saying that this is interesting. This word, which is translated here as E-H-E-I-E-H, and then here without the terminal H, that the word encompasses 3 times, past, present, and future. And by it, the perfect and complete stability of God in all respects is signified, but who could have expressed this with a single word? But the knot does not yet seem to be untied. For why didn't he say Tohontas? And the answer is John wished to explain that the sacred name Jehovah, whose etymology is given in that place in Exodus, for if he had used hon and erkomenos as participles and hen as a verb, he certainly would not have expressed the name, but only its meaning. Namely, if he had said Tohontes kai hos en kai tu erkomeno, therefore hon, hen, and erkomenos must be taken not as participles, which is what they literally are in Greek. They're literally participles. He says, don't take them that way, but as proper names.
So there we go again. The concept that I've been talking about is that the name Jehovah comes from Hava or Haya. TurretinFan can go back through my earlier videos to discover what I said about that, because I did go to quite a long length to prove that one was an ancient form of Hava, the Haya was. And so we see that the Hava has its, or Jehovah has its link in I Am, in Exodus, with the past, the present, and the future. It's a proper name. And so here it's placed in the text as a proper name. So it's not taken, that these words, the on, en, and akomenos, are not taken as participles, but as proper names, or specifically, like I guess each one is a distinct name, but it is the name of Jehovah. And so
interestingly, he does say proper names plural. Should double check that that's the right translation, but I think, I don't know. Maybe I'll double check that translation. But in any event, I think he does say names plural, or maybe it's ambiguous in Latin. I don't want to make too big a point about the plural versus singular. I'd like to double check that point. But anyway, so where did I stop here? But it's proper names. As if you were to say the word for grace to you and peace, if you were to say, word for word, grace to you and peace from he who is, and who was, and who is coming. In order that this could be understood in the Greek language, it was necessary to add the prepositive article, and indeed the masculine one, even to the verb, hen, as if hen were a proper name, from which is also understood what I said before, namely that the article ho in ho on and ho erkomenos is joined not as participles, nor as names technically or materially accepted, but as proper names. There still remains one scruple, for when the proper names are also, when proper names are also inflected, why did he not say tu hontos kai hos hen kai tu erkomenu. Surely John also has in mind that among the Hebrews, the name Jehovah is always uniform, although the subjacent points change, which are indeed not proper to the name itself, but are derived from elsewhere. Therefore, John did not even wish to inflect the article as if it were too part of the proper name. I do find this interesting, that his point is that the name Jehovah is never declined or conjugated or manipulated in Hebrew. It's always just the 4 letters. Anyway, it would be, you wouldn't conjugate it unless it was a verb, but it has this verbal aspect because he's being represented by 3 participles. That's why I mentioned conjugation. It says, for if he had said tu hontes or tu...
So at least TurretinFan, in reading my book, he's come to the point where he would now be going, yes, Nick was right. Jehovah does mean the one who was and is and shall be. It can mean the one who was and is to come. But I've said it in my words, the purest form. If he wants to use some other words, a different form would be the one who was and is and shall be. And so that is different to the one who was and is to come. But at least he's up to speed with all this now. Because when we first started the book, he didn't know any of this. So now it's sort of like, I think the thing is, once you see this, you can't unsee it. You see it everywhere. Every time you see the name Jehovah, every time you see, the Triadic Declaration, every time you see past, present, and future, your ears prick up, and you're like, oh, hang on. And it's just something that in the Textus Receptus is perfectly laid out for us. In the critical text, it's not. And that's why he's fighting against a lot of this, because the critical text doesn't have the same type of harmonization that the Textus Receptus has. Textus Receptus has a beautiful harmonization all the way through. All the Triadic declarations have past, present, and future. And it makes for a full picture, where these guys have some just having the 2, some having 3, but the third one is holy. One has it backwards for no apparent reason. Well, we have it backwards because the past and present, because of the chiastic nature, I think that's how you pronounce it, of the Book of Revelation and the way that John was writing these Triadic declarations. And so all this is, to me, it just shows a perfect text, a text that it's like looking at a Fibonacci sequence. You see these patterns there and you go, yeah, that makes a beautiful picture. When you see something that doesn't make a beautiful picture, it's all over the place and it's scattered. And even in the translation of Theodore Beza's Revelation 16:5 annotations, just reading through that, how he's saying that there is a solecism there, basically. And so I hadn't really picked up on that because I was looking at a lot of other aspects. But he was saying there's a solecism there, so which is quite interesting. So TurretinFan is supporting a solecism with his reading. So that's quite interesting. Anyway.
To erkomenu, they would have seemed like participles, not names. And if he had written to n, the article would have seemed of neuter gender, as if to n were materially, as they say, understood. It remains for us to note that n is better translated as was rather than has been, so that perpetuity may be declared united with the eternity, that is, which has not had a beginning and is foreign to all interruption, as we said in John 1:1. So there's a little bit of a reference back there to John 1:1 about the eternality of God. But
okay, well, I wouldn't say it's just a little thing. I would say that the eternality of God has been mentioned quite a few times here, in that sense of the I am, Jehovah, past, present, future, and all that sort of stuff. But that's interesting. He's saying, as we said in John 1:1, so that would be And that's sort of the way that I read Revelation 16:5 footnote. It was like, oh, he's pointing back to this other one. So that's why I went to Revelation 1:4. And that's where I picked up, it's related to Jehovah, it's related to I am. This is a holy name, a sacred name, da-da-da. You do, the Karen look around the room and, a few little squares and triangles, appear in a bit of algebra. And you're like, aha, this is the name of God, the holy name of God. So they put holy on it, in nomina sacra, because this is a sacred name. And so he does talk about that this is a holy name. He does say sacred name here. John wished to explain the sacred name, whose etymology is given in the place of it in Exodus. And so he is explaining this sacred name with the past, the present, and the future. And so this is the whole thing. It's not just, okay, we're just going to throw in some words there to explain God or anything. He's explaining the name. Okay. So it's a bit like if you were to get all, I remember using an RF gun. Okay. If you get an RF gun, you can put it on a piece of metal, piece of rock, and it will show you what's in that rock in as far as you can sort of, on the surface. It can't tell you what's right in the middle of it. It could be a gold nugget and, it doesn't register, but on the surface of that rock, if it's got gold, if it's got iron, it'll tell you exactly the proponents, the elements that are made up of that. So when you got Jehovah and you expand those elements, we know it's got the past, present, and future, because it's not just because of Jehovah itself, because of the name itself. That should be enough. But because it's related to I am, which has the past, present, and future as well. And so, and then we see in these triadic declarations, past, present, future, past, present, future. So why on earth would someone think that you can just get the name, expand it, and not have the future element? It doesn't make any sense. Because, like I was saying, with using an RF gun on a rock, you can tell what elements they are inside that rock, okay? When Revelation 16:5 is explaining which art and wast and shalt be, it's not just explaining, oh God, you were and you are and you're good, you're holy, you're a nice guy, it's expounding the name of Jehovah. And so when it's doing that, you can't just add elements to it. You can't take away elements from it. It's going to have the elements that are in Jehovah. And so Jehovah, coming from Haya, coming from Hava, has the to be in it. To be or not to be, that's the question. To be in it, or you are, you exist in it. And when God's speaking in the first person, he says, I am. And so these things are very clear. And you would not expect to expand the, like if I was to expand the name of, sometimes when you're doing etymology, there's only so far you can go with etymology. Like when you say the Russian word for thank you is spasiba. Okay. So it's actually spasiba. It means thank God. It's a bog for God. But it's spasiba. And so it's thank God. But most Russians, they might know that in the back of their mind, but they don't usually say thank you with God in mind. Efcharisto in Greek, thank you. We usually think of a Eucharist, but actually means thanksgiving. Okay. Now, many words, especially in European languages, many of these words have etymological roots, but you can only go so far with them. Okay. Like when I did my debate on Easter, I was going back to resurrection and things like that, but you can only go so far. You can't say it means, there's a guy standing on the moon. You can't make it mean it's talking about, you're eating an orange. It's limited. And the name of Jehovah, the etymology is explained that it comes from I am. So that limits it even more. And if you were to get someone's name, like you might have someone as your father, dad, or father, or whatever you call them. Some people, they don't call their dad or daddy or whatever. It depends on the culture. But if you were to expand his name out, it might be Robert Thomas Smith, and that's his full name. So you wouldn't just expect to have Robert Thomas, like everywhere on every document, it's got Robert Thomas Smith, signed Robert Thomas Smith, and the last one, Robert Thomas, and it's like architect or something. It's like, yeah, he was an architect, but that's weird. Usually he's saying these other things, that's not his full name. And the thing is, clearly this is saying that it's not explaining about God. It's explaining the proper name of God. And it doesn't even have any inflections or anything on these participles because it's a proper name. And so I don't know how TurretinFan can get around that. I just, like, these things are huge in my mind. So when TurretinFan's like, the manuscripts, this and that, and it's like, how can you get around the fact that the name of Jehovah has these three elements? So anyway, let's continue. But at the end of the day, my next step would probably be to look at John 1:1 and see what's said there. It looks like it's just talking about the eternality of God, but there might actually be something there about the name of Jehovah, perhaps the Logos. It's very interesting.
The main point here, which has been introduced, is that Beza is defending the grammatical irregularities of 1:4, and he's doing so on the basis that this is representative of the name. These are proper names of God, and that these are derived from the etymology of the name Jehovah. And then he says, and
the name Jehovah is derived from the etymology of I am. That was pretty clear. So it does clearly say that whose etymology is given in that place in Exodus. And so it's clearly saying I am. But it has here, that is, I am, I was, I will be, has sent me to you. So it's interesting. That's why I'm like, well, okay, so maybe I should look at the translation that I've got, just to, I'm not sure how accurate, and I'm not sure who wrote the one that I've got, but I just, we want truth. It's absolutely torrentially raining now at the moment, and so if I start speaking louder, it's just because I'm speaking over the rain and over the thunder. Okay, so I've got Revelation 16:5 here in my folder. Actually, it's on Google Docs. So let's have that won't work because I'm looking for Revelation 16:5 translation and trying to compare it to this, which is silly because I didn't have 1:4. And so that was one of the things I really, from the beginning, I was like, I need Revelation 1:4, and I poured over that Latin in Revelation 1:4. I put it into Google Translate. I looked at every single word and tried to decipher it, but I couldn't translate it, but I could get the gist. And so
the one who is to come, kai ho komenos, why not rather ho somenos? I think that's what this is supposed to be. He has this interesting abbreviation. I think he means asomenos, ho somenos, as hoed. Certainly for two reasons. First, because it would seem in some way to introduce some new principle of essence. Then because it sets God up everywhere to be proposed to us as a judge. However, we know that it will happen, the Father will judge the world in the Son. See below 15:5. So this is a bit vague.
So yeah, sorry about the rain sound. I'll have to just talk over it. But so it says see below 15:5. I think it should say 16:5. But I will look at other editions we've got the 1598 here, I think it is, and so I'll look at the other editions and just see what's written there. And 1598 has typos and errors in it. It's quite interesting that some of those typos and errors actually influence some of the typos and errors that were in the initial King James edition. And I've had people say, "Oh, see, it says this in the King James," or when you go back to Beezer, it's actually an error in his text. And so the typesetters must have been going through and looking at those things. But yeah, anyway.
This particular comment. And the 15.5 is very, very vague. I'm almost certain that this is just a transcriptional, not a transcriptional, I think this is just a typo that got repeated in multiple editions of Basil's annotations, that he meant 16.5 and he said 15.5, because there's nothing relevant in 15.5 that I can find. And 16.5 is highly relevant and related. So I'm pretty sure this is just an error, 15.5. But in any event, I didn't provide any transcription of the notes at 1.8. They're dealing with the alpha and omega and some other details, but not with this particular phrase. At 4.8, he provides some additional comments. What he says here is, remember, 4.8 reverses the order: was, is, and will come. And he says, the Vulgate and Erasmus, who was, who is, and who will come, an interpretation that I'm compelled to embrace somewhat so that I may avoid novelty. Otherwise, it's quite clear that en, hon, and erkomenos are placed in position of God's proper name. Nor should they be understood as in the common language as being said about someone who was, is, and will come. Moreover, this passage is also remarkable for establishing the coessential deity of Christ when it is discussed about the one who is to come, that is, about Christ himself.
And so that's one of the things that I've been pointing out continuously, is that I don't know why critical text people aren't talking more about these verses, because clearly it's the expanded name of Jehovah, which is the etymology comes from I am, and it has the one which was and is to come, and that's talking about Christ. So this is huge, that like in proving the deity of Christ. Like with the Textus Receptus, we have 5 verses in the book of Revelation that prove that Jesus is Jehovah. It's quite amazing. But I don't know why people are so silent on these. I guess because the more that people look into it, the more they'll see that Revelation 11:17 and Revelation 16:5 don't have the full name. It's almost just like it's people. The whole concept has just been flushed down the toilet because of these errors, and because people are like, there's error there, and people just keep pointing out, Revelation 16:5's got a problem, and so people have just stopped even looking at it. Now, I know that James White will say that if there's a textual variant in the text, you're probably best off just to skip over it, sort of thing. And so I guess people are doing that in these places. They're just sort of going, 11:17 and 16:5, let's just skip over it.
So I appreciate him.
Now, you know what's really strange? I'm getting that deja vu feeling again that I've actually gone over all this material, which is a really annoying thing, because I'm almost certain that I've gone over this. And I'm almost certain that the last video that I critiqued was 1 hour and 15 minutes. And so what I'm going to have to do is I'm just going to have to fiddle around for a little bit. I'm going to go to my website and look at the latest videos that I've done, the live ones. Okay, open this one up. So I'm just going to search around for a little bit. Okay. No, definitely not that one, so that's good. Let's grab another one. channel. Live. Prefer to trust. Okay. Yeah, so it looks like I've actually gone through this material, which is a real shame. I'm just not sure. I'm sort of stuck in a bit of a time warp. So where are we? So let's have a look. Some Textus Receptus issues for the last 200 years. There's only been okay. But he's looking at Revelation 16:5, so that's not this. Okay, so that's good. That means I think I'm just having a case of deja vu. Anyway, let's just continue because sometimes it's just quicker to just go through it, and even if I've done it, it's like just finish this thing. So we've got about half an hour to go on this video. So this will be here's number 19, and then I think there's still 3 more videos, and one of them goes for like 4 hours. So I want to try and get these done. I'm just a little bit over them.
Following Vulgate and Erasmus here, but my comment on this point is, notice that although the name for Jehovah is not altered, it's always the same.
And it should be.
This order between 1 and 4 and 8 has been changed in 4-8.
Well, as we mentioned before, on my website, if you want to go there and have a bit of a sniff around, you can see this concept. Where are we? Chiastic structure. As I've mentioned a lot of times now, a TurretinFan sort of just seems to be going, it's different here, so it's wrong. And it's like, well, the chiastic structure has, it's easier to see here, which I've emboldened the past, the present, and the future at 4-8. But in the A and B of 1-4 and 1-8 have the present, the past, and the future. And then the B and the A in 11-17 and 16-5 have, again, the present, the past, and the future. And so the middle verse being the one where it's turned around. And so this is quite interesting. This is really quite amazing because it has, I would encourage people to Google what these are, even just do a Wikipedia search on these chiastic structures. They're all throughout the Bible, and they're all throughout a lot of ancient Greek writings, Homer, Plato. And so we can just give an example of in Genesis, where it has, the A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. And then in the middle, it has God remembers Noah. And then if we go backwards, it mentions all the same things. The waters increase, or the opposite things. The waters decrease, entering the ark, exiting the ark, animals in man's hand. We've got animals, food and food, all living creatures, and so we see this structure is in Revelation concerning the Triadic declarations. So to me, this is just yet another evidence of the beautiful structure that's in the Textus Receptus, which is totally obliterated when you get the critical text, because it has all these here, but then it doesn't have and art to come. It's completely deleted from the critical text. And then you have here, instead of and shall be, the future form, it just has and holy, which is like, well, why? And so this has the past, present, future, and in the middle it has the past, present, future. And the other times it's present, past, and future. So it's very interesting. So I would get people to examine that and think about that.
So it's not who is and was and will come. It's was and is and will come. It's a different order. And Beza, although he uses the indeclinability of the name to explain why that's in 1.4, the issue that he's explaining this indeclinability of the name by the fact that there's this nominative article instead of a genitive article, he explains that by saying, "Oh, you don't mess with God's name." But here in 4.8, the order of the verbs is changed, and he doesn't comment on that as it relates to this unchangeableness of God's name. And in 11.7,
but it doesn't change God's name. It's just emphasizing the present, the past, and the future. In all other places where 4.8 is the past, the present, and future, it's still the same. In a sense where it's still got all the elements there. So we got one comment here. Faith at Work by Love is saying, "Hi, everyone."
17, it's very terse. His comments are very terse. He just says, "which are, see above." But notice again, although now he has in his Latin, he even changes the conjugation of Latin verbs to second person instead of first person. He had previously said that God's name doesn't follow those same rules in Greek because of its similar not following the rules in Hebrew. So why in the world is he changing the conjugation, or why is he changing the conjugation of the Latin verbs that he's using to represent the name here? I don't know. He doesn't explain it.
And being a world-class Latin and Greek scholar, I mean, I think he knew what he was doing.
And then finally, Revelation 16:5, he says, and here's, I think this is a better translation than the one that was offered by Nick, so I'm going to work from this.
And as I've said, it would be great to see who did this. Did TurretinFan do it? Jan Krant? Whose translation is this? Because, as I went through the other night, that's what I did. Actually, the other night I read through all these from the website that this is on. And that's why I'm having this deja vu all the time, because I've actually gone through these myself. But yeah, so it would be good to know who did the translation or a link to who did it.
It says, and who you will be, hoesomenos. It is commonly read kai osius, the article indicating against all manner of speaking, that the scripture has been...
Because let me just start off here. It says, and who you will be, hoekomenos. Hoekomenos means and shall be. But notice it's like, and who you will be. It's like, why not have what people have been saying for years and years and years and years? Yeah, like even just, you will be. Quiet eris. Hoekomenos. So the thing is, you, in the annotations of Theodore Beza, you usually have the Latin and then you have the Greek. Okay, so what you have with Theodore Beza, he has 3 columns. He has his Greek, then he has his own translation of the Greek into Latin, then he has the Latin Vulgate, and then underneath that he has his annotations. And so in the annotations, usually you'll see he'll start with the Latin first of his own translation, and then he'll go into the Greek, which will be akin or synonymous or verbatim. And so hoesomenos, I don't think throughout this whole entire, what's this, 25 videos, hours and hours and hours, I don't think I've heard and who you will be as just, the best representation of hoesomenos, especially when we're dealing with this issue. Because people would be like, "Oh, what's that mean?" and who you will be. That's and shall be. And so is someone else. And so that's why I'm like, who's translating this? Is this translated with a bias? If TurretinFan has translated this, is he putting those words there so you won't think it says shall be? Or I'm not sure. I don't think he would do that, but perhaps he's just being a little bit too lengthy there, a little bit too creative, or a bit wooden.
And corrupted. So, this is a pretty serious charge that there's corruption. There's some kind of corruption in the scripture. And what he means, of course, is that the Greek manuscript tradition has been corrupted in some way. And he thinks that that's demonstrated by the fact that there's this article before Hosios. And then he says, but whether the Vulgate reads the article or not, in other words, you can't really tell if the Vulgate follows this article because Latin doesn't have articles. He says, but whether the Vulgate reads the article or not, it translates Hosius no more correctly as sanctus, holy, wrongly omitting the particle kai, which is absolutely necessary to connect dikaios and Hosius. So the kai needs to be there in order to connect Hosius with dikaios, righteous and holy. And that you saw that in the previous translations, all those English translations, it was always righteous and holy, righteous and holy, righteous and holy. There was the one edition that was like righteous, which was and is.
And I deep down, I know I've already reviewed this. It's a real shame, because I'm sort of stuck in this loop where I'm trying to respond to these videos, but I'm pretty sure I've actually responded to this video already. So I'm being too overzealous and just jumping on and just pressing play. And it's like, I know I've heard this before. I'm pretty sure I did this just last week, but let's continue. I'm already, 50 minutes into it now. There's no, don't stop me. Let's just continue on.
And holy. But the and holy is used to connect back to righteous in this understanding. And interestingly, this is where there is a division in the Greek texts. Some of the Greek texts have the chi, some of the Greek texts don't have the chi. I think it's like a minority reading about, around in the 100 manuscripts that I was looking at,
I can almost say
it was around 30% had the chi and the others didn't. But the chi is quite an old reading. I mean, it's not, I don't recall if it's the oldest that we have, but it's certainly one of the, it's a very old reading. So is it possibly original? That's not the point of this discussion so much, but it's an interesting and important question. And here he says it's absolutely necessary to connect dikaios and Hosius. So up to this point, it seems like he's just dealing with the chi and the article. But then he goes, when John, in all other places, where he explains the name of Jehovah, as we said above, 1.4, usually adds the third, namely kai ho ekromenos, why would he have omitted that here? So now you can see where Beza is now trying to make a correction because of this article before Hosius, Hosius. He's trying to come up with a way of fixing what he sees as a problem here. And he's raising as an additional issue the lack of parallel between...
Well, it seems that Valla thought it was a problem, Erasmus thought it was a problem, and Beza is just working on that issue. So I'm going to bring that translation over that I had with mine, because I'm just not sure about what it says. So okay, so it says, but with John there remains a completeness where the name of Jehovah the Lord is used. Okay. And so I think that that's better than what's written here. But when John, in all the other places where he explains the name of Jehovah, as we've said in 1:4, usually adds a third, namely Kai Ekomenos. Why would he omit that here? But here it has, but with John there remains a completeness where the name of Jehovah, the Lord, is used. And so to me, that's where I get my understanding of when the name of Jehovah is used in the book of Revelation, that that we see that's when the triadic declaration appears, because it has, but with John there remains a completeness where the name of Jehovah is used. So when the Lord, and it's got in brackets said the Lord, and so as I pointed out in my book, where Jesus would say, I am Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the ending, saith the Lord, which is and was and is to come. And so straight away it's a triadic declaration after the Lord is said. And so this is the testimony all throughout the book of Revelation, as I've written in my book. And I know TurretinFan went through that and he was sort of shaking his head at every point. But I think anyone who reads through that can see that I've put in way more information than really probably needed to be put into a book on that. But so to me, that's what he's saying there. But with John, there remains a completeness, and it's where the name of Jehovah is used. Okay, so it's we see, righteous are you, O Lord, and so that would be equivalent to the Hebrew Jehovah. And then it has which art and wast and shalt be, and because it has here, just as we have said before in 1:4, he always uses the three closely together, and so he's saying the triadic pattern usually appears after the name Lord, not a biadic, not a dyadic, or singular. It's usually the three are used closely together. Therefore, it is certainly Kai Ekomenos, for why would he pass over it in this place? And like, to me, this is very clear. And also the word Pantocrator, as I was going through, I realized Pantocrator, whenever that is in the dialogue, like in that same verse or the verse before or the verse after, it's like that's usually where the triadic declaration appears as well. And so that's quite interesting. And so also Theos. Okay, so you have Kurios or Theos or Pantocrator, the Lord God Almighty. And so I think this was just common knowledge to Erasmus and Theodore Beza. They knew these things. They looked at these patterns, and that's one of the reasons why Theos is actually omitted in Revelation chapter 1 verse 8, because it is seen as a pattern that appears in the other verses. So I think that scribes actually grabbed the word God and put it into verse 8, because it has the critical text has I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, says the Lord God, who was and is to come. Where the Textus Receptus, they've omitted the word God there. So it just has I am an Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the ending, saith the Lord, which was and is to come. But this comes down to who's saying it, because we believe that Jesus is saying it, where if you have the Lord God, what that does, I'm not saying Jesus isn't God, but most of the time when it's saying, the Lord God says this, Lord God said that, it's God the Father. And so this was something that was contested in the early church, that people were looking at these issues and trying to make it so, because it actually comes against the deity of Christ. Because if you don't have God there, but you have Jesus being the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the ending, he's the Lord who was and is and is, it's like, that's Jehovah, that's God, But then if you have God there, it's like, oh, no, it's the Father speaking. That's what the Jehovah's Witnesses say. Oh, it's the Father speaking. And so then it actually detracts from the deity of Christ. So that's all. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of theological stuff there that because there was a guy called Jonathan Burris, and he did some videos on Revelation 1:8. So I was just looking into it, and I was like, oh, it's interesting. It's a triadic declaration. And so some of the work that I'd done on triadic declaration sort of came in handy with that. But, I haven't really exhausted anything on Revelation 1:8 or any of the other triadic declarations. It takes a long time to go through, and sometimes you can just be touching on the surface for years and years and years, and finally you get a bit of a break and you spend a few days studying it, and then something just gels, and you're like, yeah, I can see this now. I understand what these commentators are saying now. And so anyway, let's let TurretinFan continue. But yeah, I'm just a little bit sus on that translation. Anyway,
in quote unquote all the other places, although as we've talked about it, Beza seems to have been wrong about one of those other places. But keep in mind, from Beza's point of view, in 1.4 in chapter 1 verses 4,
notice he's saying Beza got it wrong in one of those places. Talking about 11:17. So but he knew about it. Here he says at the beginning, it is commonly read Osios. So he knows what the usual reading, it says in the other edition, the usual reading is Osios. So he knows what the manuscripts are saying. I just, why think that he doesn't know in 11:17? Just because it's an obscure verse doesn't mean he doesn't know about it. He writes notes on it. He obviously checked these things.
4 and 8. In chapter 4, verse 8, and in chapter 11, verse 17, Beza thinks that you have all three times, past, present, and future, or present, past, and future. But anyway, you have all three. So in those places, they add the third, the kai hoarkomenos. So why would he omitted that here? Now, he asked the question, but for him, it's just obvious that he must not have omitted it here. And he says, therefore, and this itaque, it's a kind of a key point. This is the therefore that's telling of what was Beza's thought. His thought was he really believes this is not the right reading, even though the Greek manuscripts have it. He thinks that the article demonstrates that the scripture has been corrupted here. And therefore, he says he cannot doubt that the genuine scripture is what I have restored from an old bona fide manuscript, literally an old manuscript of good faith, namely ho esomenos. And the reason why hoarkomenos is not written here, as in the four places above, namely 1:4 and 8 and 4:8 and 11:17, is this: because there it deals with Christ as the judge who is to come, but in this vision he's presented as already sitting on the tribunal and exercising the decreed judgments, and indeed eternal ones. Now maybe he means that in 15:5 is where he sits down as sits on his throne. Perhaps that's what he has in mind. I'm not sure. But anyway, so maybe 15:5 wasn't a typo. I think it is, but I'm not sure. But anyway, so now you'll notice, and here's that.
I think I know what's happened now. I was actually commenting here, I'm pretty sure. Maybe I wasn't. Anyway.
The notes at 1560 in his 1565, and actually you can't quite see because of the scrolling issue. But you can see that on the left side is the Greek text of 1565, and it has Hohosius, and he's underlined this, and he's also marked some things about this quia judicasti. He's changing that as well. But you'll notice, let's see if I can scroll this across for everyone, that in the right margin, he has written ho esomenos in his own handwriting. It's not the easiest thing to read. It's just all by itself. So that's his note to himself that he is going to, let's see if I can get back out of here. He's going to change it. And that's what we have. Those are the notes we have from Beza on this point. So there are some points where I would kind of disagree with Nick's analysis of what Beza was thinking. So, like, for example, he says that, what were some of the points? He says that and wholly caused a division between the words. That's not what Beza was saying. Beza was saying is that the absence of the chi is problematic in the Vulgate.
The and wholly caused a division. Well, it does say that in my one. Okay, so let's have a look. Okay. So the usual publication. So let's have a look at the difference here. Well, that's interesting. It doesn't seem like TurretinFan's got the K there. The K hot or someone else. It just says hot or someone else. So I would say this is TurretinFan's own translation. Is commonly read Kai ho Ozios. The usual publication is Kai ho Ozios. The article indicating against all manner of speaking that the scripture has been corrupted. And it says here, which shows a division contrary to the whole phrase, which is foolish, distorting what is put in scripture. So there's quite a big difference between these two. So I've just got to be careful who I'm looking at, because I know that this one here was the one that was very popular on the internet when I wrote the book. But this one here, I have no idea who did this. I'm pretty sure it's TurretinFan. And so, he does have a picture of it up here. So I wonder if that's actually a mistake with the conjunction there. Well, I can't scroll that up. That's the problem. But I can go to his website. We'll just go down. Sure to make you dizzy with this. That's Erasmus's annotations. Okay, keep going down to Beza. Older posts. Okay, here we are. Okay, that's 1.4. Okay, so we've got 16.5 here. And yeah, it has the Kai. Kai ho esomenos. So I'm not sure why that's omitted there. I guess it can, because the Kai is actually sort of squished, it can look like that's just a whole bunch of Latin, and then it says it's capital letter ho esomenos. So it does look like that's even actually a line there that's separating those. But yeah, I'll have to go over and just double check that one, and perhaps maybe I'll check over it and just point out a few things to TurretinFan where I think they're in error. I don't think it's a huge deal, but I'm just not confident in taking exactly what TurretinFan's translated here as gospel. Okay, so we've got Andy the American sharing his insights as no, mom, you can milk, nom. Love it. Just that's awesome. Thanks, Andy. Okay, let's continue.
Is wrong because it completely omits the Kai, and he thinks that's absolutely necessary to connect Dikaios and Hosias. So That's the issue that he's seeing there. That's the problem of it's being divided up by not allowing you to have the and there. The bigger problem for him is this ho-hosius. He thinks that because it says ho-hosius, that there must be a problem, because he doesn't anticipate that God would be called the Holy One here. So for him, the problem,
there's nothing wrong with God being called the Holy One. There are places where it says, "For you are righteous and holy," and it's got similar themes, but it's because it's a name. It's the etymology of Jehovah is the one which was and is and shall be, and that you can't change that. You can't just throw part of that out. And I know there are manuscripts with that in it, and to me this type of concept explains why, because people could have easily looked up this type of information as to the name of Jehovah and what it would be expanded to be, but it seems that people all over the place, sometimes they had the past, sometimes they had the present, sometimes they had the future form, sometimes they had the past and the future, sometimes they had the past and the present, sometimes they had the present and the future, and some of them had holy, some of them didn't have holy, a lot of them did. And so I would suggest that holy is an indication to a nomina sacra, because this is the holiest name of God.
The real problem all stems from this article. And as a result, the way he fixes it is he says, well, what else could it be? In the other instances where there's an explanation of the name of Jehovah, in other words, this spelling out of Jehovah's name, meaning I am, I was, and I shall be. The other places have oikomenos, so there should be some third term here as well. Now, had Beza known that he was wrong at 1117 and that there isn't a third one there, then he might,
of course, he knew,
not have been so quick to make this particular change here. And he might have
he just didn't know what he was doing, just writing notes everywhere and just fumbling around. Joe Biden moment. No, he knew what he was doing.
Found a better reason for maintaining the Greek text as it is, but he didn't. So he thought there was this pattern, and he needed to finish the pattern in 16.5 as well. And so he had to decide between what Erasmus had proposed, which is, and we may talk about that more another time, Erasmus had proposed oikomenos, and Erasmus had proposed, rather than adopting that, maybe Vala had as well. I think Nick suggests that Vala, and we may talk about that more another time. So
sorry about that.
He had to select between that and something else, but the something else is hoisomenos. And so he ended up going with hoisomenos. And the reason he gives is because he's already sitting on the tribunal. He's not coming in judgment in the future. So the third part is not that he's coming in judgment, but now it's just he will be. So I appreciate your comment. This is some high-level scholastica. Well, it's a fun study that I've been going through. I've just been reading through Nick's book and trying to analyze the arguments that he's presented. He's sort of led the way here, and hopefully the work that he's put in, I can sort of build on that and go from there. But what about this old bona fide manuscript? So I have some serious reservations about this claim that Beza says. He says he cannot doubt that the genuine scripture is what I have restored from an old bona fide manuscript, namely this. This old bona fide manuscript, I have no idea what it is, or even if it ever existed. And here's my problem with that. Some people will say, well, Beza said he had a manuscript.
So he's saying he doesn't believe in what Beza's saying. Beza said he has an old manuscript, but because TurretinFan doesn't know about it today in 2023, he probably didn't. I mean, if you were reading the annals of Captain Cook and he said, well, I landed on this island and there were natives there and, we exchanged goods and then we sailed on. But you went to that island today and there's no natives there. It's like, oh, well, never happened. Where's the proof? It's like, well, the proof is in his writings. Why are you doubting his writings? Has he got a history of lying? And I've said this to TurretinFan quite a bit. It's like, well, so Bees is lying. He's like, I'm not saying Bees is lying. It's like, well, what are you saying then? And Jan Kranz is like, oh, well, he said he had a manuscript, but he tricked himself. Joe Biden moment.
Which I think I've heard Nick say that. And I will just want to point out on that point, that is not what he says. He does not say he had a manuscript. He just says he corrected it from an old manuscript. Now, you might think that's a narrow point of distinction.
And so here we're opening up to the collation concept. So we're about to go into the whole collation concept, which is basically an anecdote, which if Beezer does anything that they can't figure out, they haven't worked it all out yet or found the manuscripts or whatever. So what they say is, well, Henry Stephanus, he was a bright guy and he did his, Textus Receptus editions. But then, unfortunately, Henry, his son, he took over the business, being the eldest, and he was probably just a pimply-faced little twerp who didn't really know much, because he was a bit of an idiot. He's probably just there playing PlayStation. Or I'm just, obviously I'm making this up, but this is the type of thing that is brought across, that Henry Stephanus was just a little bit, had a bit of a low IQ, or didn't really care about his dad's business, or was way too young. This is actually what's said. He was way too young to do any type of collation work. So, I mean, this is absolute projection. 200 years ago, to get into Harvard University, you had to already know Latin. The test just to get in is almost what people even graduating wouldn't even know those things nowadays. And so the standards have dropped quite a bit. And so when you look at Henry Stephanus, there's no indication whatsoever that he couldn't have done this, that he couldn't have done amazing collation work. There's just no shadow put over him in his life. And he became Beza's main printer for the rest of Beza's life. And he went on to print grammar books and books on the Syriac. He printed Syriac Bibles. He did so much work. And there's absolutely no reason for us to think less of this guy. But, the scholars in Munster say, oh, he was only like 18 when he did these collations. And so even though they don't have the collations today, they're just like, well, that's probably what Beza was talking about. Not really an ancient manuscript, like he said. He just went to the collations, which were done by Henry Stephanus. So it just becomes these anecdotes that they've got absolutely no proof for. And then at the end of the day, it's like, oh, well, yeah, it's just some... this will become like the dividing line narrative. James White will get on there and say, how can you believe someone? How can you follow the Textus Receptus? The Texti Recepti, when Henry's... And usually gets all the names wrong and the dates wrong and all the rest of it, which is really tiring. But he's like, Henry Stephanus, he was 18 when he did this. How can an 18-year-old make these things? How can he get the correct collation? He couldn't. As if when you're 18, you just brain dead. I mean, when you look back in history, a lot of the most remarkable things that have happened in history have been done by people before the age of 30, before the age of 25 a lot of the time. I mean, Alexander the Great, he was conquering half the planet by that time. And so an 18-year-old who has grown up as the eldest son of the best printer in Europe at that time, who's the royal printer for the royal family in Paris. We're not just talking about some guy who runs a print shop down the road, from you. Like imagine, someone who is printing for the royal family. That they would be, even today, someone taking over that type of business. Like you look at, say, the Murdochs. James Murdoch taking over from Rupert Murdoch. grooming him and showing him the ropes and doing all sorts of things, and letting him make a few mistakes here and there, but reeling him back in. And these guys, to take over, be a CEO of a company like that, they have to know everything. And so Henry Stefanus would have been trained in all these aspects. Someone would have been training him how to collate and how to do things. They would have been double checking everything that he did. But at the end of the day, it doesn't say collation here. It does not say collation. And so, anyway.
And maybe it is a narrow point of distinction, but the question, it's one thing to say that he did it from an old manuscript and to say he did it from a manuscript he had. Those are two different things. And how could those two different things be reconciled? Well, when you look at, and we may have to talk about this in another episode since we're getting about 1 hour now already, but when you look at the rest of Beza's annotations, you'll notice that in Revelation, well, if you look at throughout the New Testament in his annotations, you'll see that he refers only to two manuscripts that he has. He refers to Codex Claromontanus. See if I can find it the right way to pronounce it quickly. Claromontanus, Codex Claromontanus, which is a diglot, a Greek-Latin uncial manuscript. And it is an old manuscript, but it doesn't have Revelation, as far as I'm aware. Pretty sure it doesn't have Revelation, but it is a Greek-Latin diglot, and it is quite old. And he does sometimes refer to this as my old Greek manuscript, or something like that. Then he has also the other manuscript that he has that I think he also refers to as my old Greek manuscript, which is now called Codex Beza, or Codex Beza Cantabrigianus. It's also a very old manuscript. Not a great manuscript in the sense of having a very accurate text, but old, and therefore interesting, at least because it's old. So he did have those two quite old manuscripts, and he does refer to those two. But as far as manuscripts he says he has, those are the two. What about these other references to references to something reading such and such a way in an old manuscript? Well, from what we can see, he uses collations by others in his work. So he uses collations by...
So sorry about the huge rain outside, but the collations, he did it from a collation. So that's becoming the official line now.
By Erasmus, Stephanus, the Complutensian polyglot. He does mention the Complutensian polyglot, so he has that. If you consider that another, it's not a manuscript, but he does specifically refer to the Complutensian polyglot, if I recall correctly. But he also talks about Erasmus. He talks about, he does speak about Arethus, which is just, I believe, the same thing as Andreas' commentary in Revelation. He'll say Arethus has such and such. But he seems to be referring not to some specific copy that he has of Andrew of Caesarea's commentary, but to readings that are indicated as coming from that commentary by other collators. And seemingly the most interesting thing that he has, which we don't have now, is a collation by Henry Stephanus, which would seem invaluable. And we wish we had it, and it might still exist somewhere, but it's either been lost or destroyed over the years.
So I can't see why Henry Stephanus's collation can go missing, apparently, but and they believe that existed. Well, why aren't they believing that there's a manuscript here? The Beza said there's a manuscript. It's just like, well, someone somewhere has said there was a collation of manuscripts, and so perhaps Beza used that, and then that's just become the official story. And I just don't see any weight to that.
And no one knows quite where it is right now. But Henry Stephanus had done a collation of a number of manuscripts, something like, I want to say something like 17 manuscripts, but including a couple manuscripts in Revelation. And we don't have those notes. When Stephanus printed the New Testament, this is like the father of Henry Stephanus, when he printed the New Testament, he did include in the 1550, he did include some textual collation notes in the margins, but he didn't include all the notes, evidently, from Henry Stephanus's collation. And therefore, there are places where there may be some textual evidence that Beza had through these collation notes, which we don't have. Now, whether there's some collation note somewhere that specifies this, it's hard to say. We can't, that's just information we don't have. But none of the Greek manuscripts that we have ever seen have the reading that Beza is talking about here. And in fact, that's not just the case now, but if you go back through time, no one who has collated manuscripts, whose collation survives, provides any evidence of such a Greek reading. Now,
well, pretty much everyone when you go through the Reformation period, scholars. So I'll just quickly jump onto my website just to prove this. And so if we type in manuscript or menu, whoops, sorry, so that's what Beza said. There's an ancient manuscript. So David Paris on Beza's notes, and so he was very clear. This was written in 1611, but it was translated a little bit later back into English. So it was originally in Latin. It says, save that instead of ho echomenos, which is to come before used, here it is ho esomenos, who shall be, as Beza hath brought to light out of an ancient manuscript, though it commonly be read Hosios and holy. Notice it doesn't say the holy one, it just says and holy. As cohering with the foregoing word dikaios, righteous, as it should say thou righteous and holy. And so it says here, see Beza's annotations on this place. So it's pretty clear that the scholars who knew their stuff in these days, they knew about Beza's manuscript. Okay, let's have a look elsewhere where this occurs. And there was a few other places where it mentions manuscript. Okay, that's Beza himself. Tremelius. Yeah, Erasmus Schemidus. So this is just Google Translate. It says, but they were restored by Beza from an ancient manuscript of good faith. So he knew about it. So this is in 1658. So I'm not sure what year this was actually printed. But this might be the printing year, but it might have been written 20 years before, 10 years before. I'm not quite sure. But most of this is pretty much identical to what Beza has, so it might even have some of what Beza has here, but it's definitely written by Erasmus Schemidus. Okay, so let's just keep going down because there are a few. Okay, so here we have 1906. No, he's not mentioning it. Let's keep going. So Jeffrey Koo, he says that he's got an ancient manuscript. So he was saying that back in 2013, as I was back then, but I dropped that notion. But when the Latin was reinterpreted, retranslated, I should say, I was convinced once again. Okay. So yeah, I think I'm actually looking for not Bengal. I'll actually just go through some of these names. Maybe it's Wetstein, maybe it is Bengal. But when you look at some of the words here, like it says Beza ex vetusto bona fide manuscript code, and so he's saying he got it from a bona fide codice, and so here we have like Google translated that, so it's probably not as accurate as could be, but at least we get Beza from the old days, as he says, good, faithful manuscripts code, and yet he seems to have given no conjecture. It's very interesting. And then we have Bengal. He says, I'm pretty sure it mentions Beza here. So maybe Beza is the one that we need to search for, but that would actually be absolutely everywhere. So But even okay, so I don't know how to pronounce that guy's name. It's pretty wild, but it says Piscator et Beza. Okay, so we know that that's probably not correct. So we know that Beza did it, not Piscator. Okay, Wordsworth, the Syriac. There was one more Latin one that I wanted to look at. Well, Isaac Newton. He says here, Kaiho Somenos, Beza Codex Antiquus. Beza from an old manuscript. Even he knew. So this is the thing. Like that's, nearly like 100 years after the 1598. And it's like everyone seemed to know about it back then. So I know that, the modern day way of collating things, the modern day way of piling manuscripts up and giving them numbers and things like that hadn't started yet. But people did know about these things. And it seems that it was accepted in those early days. So anyway, let's continue.
In fairness, Beza here doesn't say that his manuscript is a Greek manuscript or that it's a manuscript of the New Testament.
Well, he usually never amends something according to a manuscript that's a Latin or a Syriac manuscript. Now, usually what happens with Erasmus, Stephanus, and Beza, they put the Greek first, then they look at the Latin as a secondary source, but still within the closed class of witnesses. So there's three in the closed class of witnesses: the Greek, the Latin, and the early church writers. So you get the Greek and you examine the Latin in the light of the Greek. You examine the early church writers in light of the Greek. Now, the Greek corrects the Latin and corrects the early church writers, but the Latin polishes the Greek, and the early church writers guide the two, the Latin and the Greek, in a sense where, if they're talking about something like, and it mentions a verse, and you can see that in the Greek there is a solecism, in the Latin there's a meaning that doesn't make sense, well, you can almost be guaranteed that there's some sort of error that's crept into the text. And so then you're looking at other manuscripts, you're looking for that correct reading, and sometimes it can be internal evidence. And so you have conjecture from manuscripts, or you can have conjecture from internal evidence, homoioteliton, etc. And so you can, like Dan Wallace says, if you had the preamble to the Constitution of the United States and it had "we the people," in order to form a more perfect onion, you would know instinctively that it means union. It doesn't mean onion. It's not about cooking. It's not a cooking show. And so there are times in the Word of God where it's very clear that an error has crept into the text, and sometimes it's just one letter or two letters. And so you can see how a scribe could have skipped over those things. So internal evidence is strong. And so you might see something that's actually almost dropped out of the Greek, like say 1 John 5:7, but there's a solecism there. And so if you have the mismatched genders in verse 8 for no apparent reason, well, that can cause you to think, well, there's something amiss. And so when you talk to people who are experts in the Greek language, like say Georgios Babiniotis, who I talked to, he said, yes, definitely verse 8 shouldn't be the way it is without the comma. If you put the comma in there, there's no problem with the Greek. You take the comma out, there is a huge problem in the Greek. There's a massive gap in the text, and there are a bunch of changes in verse 8 with the mismatched genders that are completely unnecessary and not needed to be changed. And so that shows, it's almost like seeing, if you were to do forensics, you can a forensic scientist can tell if someone's walked through a house. Sometimes if there's muddy footprints in a house in a murder scene, you can tell how tall the person was. You can tell how, how heavy they were, even just the distance between their footsteps and things like that. And you can tell a lot by footprints. And so what we see in 1 John 5:7 is the missing text. It leaves a massive hole in the text. So things like that, the Latin, 90% of the Latin has 1 John 5:7. So the Greeks, they apparently had amended that text. And so even, who was it? Gregory Nazianzus, he said that the grammar was bad at 1 John 5:8. And he said, it's got absolutely no reason to change the genders here, but they're changed. And so he was pointing that out. Erasmus pointed out there was error. There was a solecism in the genders. If you don't have the comma there, this was pointed out by Eugenius Vulgaris. And of course, Georgios Babiniotis, he was responding to me when I asked him about Eugenius Vulgaris. And he said, yeah, Eugenius Vulgaris was correct in saying that you need verse 7 in there. So that's really strong internal evidence. So that's something that needs to be looked at. But what's interesting is I understand that in this particular section, they're claiming, if they aren't saying it's a nominus sacra like I am, then they're like, well, you got holy in all these other manuscripts, so that's the majority text reading, so we'll go with that. But it just seems strange why they're so concerned about the majority text reading only on passages where the Textus Receptus doesn't follow the majority text reading. They're not really concerned about the majority text reading, like, the last 12 verses of Mark, at Pericope Adulterae, most other places. Almost, there are so many places where they depart from the majority text. And that's why they actually called the Byzantine text the majority text, because it's like, well, it's a majority. And so they're actually fighting against that because they had the critical text back then. So anyway, let's continue.
There are uses of hoesomenos in other places besides the New Testament, and there are manuscript copies of other things that might have it. In fact, Nick's raised a lot of interesting observations of people using hoesomenos or something similar, either in Latin or in Greek, in other contexts than Revelation 16.
So as I've mentioned, I've actually gone through and critiqued this video already. I don't know what happened. I think I just rewound it and went straight back to the beginning again. So it's a lot of wasted time, but we'll get to the end of this and then we'll start the next video.
5. So is that what Beza has in mind? The problem is Beza doesn't tell us what he has in mind. And his handwritten note, which just marks it through and puts the other reading in the margin, certainly doesn't reference any specific Greek text. So is it possible that Beza is putting this note in good faith? Because after all, what is a good faith manuscript anyway? Or a manuscript of good faith? What is that?
Well, the Latin is bona fide, so it means bona fide. And so it's usually translated a good and faithful manuscript, not just a manuscript of good faith, because TurretinFan's like, what is good faith? Well, yeah, well, if it had a good and faithful manuscript, or a good faithful manuscript, then you would know what it's talking about. And so that's why I'm like, well, why is this translation, why isn't it understandable?
This is not a term that I could find Beza frequently using. I think Rasmus says that Vala had 7 Greek manuscripts of good faith, or bona fide Greek manuscripts. But what is it?
I mean, even Bessarion, he had hundreds of manuscripts. So these guys have just been tricked into thinking Erasmus had 4 manuscripts and maybe 5 and all this sort of stuff. Like, it's like, to me, it's like saying, the Harlem Globetrotters only ever owned 2 basketballs in their whole career, and it's just so dumb. Because back then, I'm not saying these guys are dumb. I'm saying that whole concept of Erasmus and Beza, these guys were surrounded by manuscripts. What did they have before printing? manuscripts. How did Erasmus learn Greek? Was he learning it from printed editions or manuscripts? But probably both. And he was actually in the scriptorium. He was in the scriptorium as a child, going through and copying Vulgate manuscripts. He knew how to copy manuscripts. He was fluent in Greek. He was the world-leading expert in Greek, world-leading expert in Latin. You don't get like that just by looking at a few manuscripts here and there. He was looking at everything. He was the proofreader in Aldus Manutius, is his print shop. So how do you not see biblical manuscripts? Even Aldus had a whole bunch of biblical manuscripts. The Byzantine school there, filled with native Greek Byzantine scholars. What, none of them owned a Bible? You know what I mean? Aldus Manutius, he wanted to print the Bible, so he would have had biblical manuscripts there. Every library that Erasmus went to would have had biblical manuscripts. He went to the Vatican Library. The Complutensian and Polyglot, they had access to dozens of manuscripts that they were able to just use whatever manuscripts they wanted from the Vatican. What, Erasmus, he couldn't look at any of the manuscripts, you know what I mean? But what they try and make out is you had to have them in your possession. You see, this isn't the prerequisite for Westcott and Hort. They just had facsimiles of Vaticanus and Statenvertaling, and half the time they weren't. They were okay, but they weren't 100%. And so, but they didn't have the original sitting in front of them. And so this is the thing. Erasmus went around to libraries writing down variants, and it clearly says that when his goods got seized in England, and they were trying to bribe him and all sorts of things, he was saying, they've stolen the works of my life. And these were just all these books with variants written in them, notes, early church quotations, commentary quotation, because this is what he gave his life to this. And so I just think the whole, they had one manuscript here and 10 manuscripts there and blah, blah, blah. These guys were surrounded by hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of manuscripts. And so, even Reuchlin, if you were just to look at, say, Erasmus with his relationship with Reuchlin or his relationship with Aldus Manutius, that would have had him being put into the presence of at least, I would say, 200 biblical manuscripts of the New Testament. In Rome, at the time of Martin Luther, there were 5,000 Greek manuscripts in Rome. Now, they weren't all biblical manuscripts, but there were 5,000 Greek manuscripts because Constantinople had just fallen. It was only like 70 years before, and they had taken their manuscripts into the safe refuge of Venice and Italy. And this is where Erasmus spent 3 years studying. He went over to Venice to perfect his Greek. So he already knew the languages. He wanted to just be fluent. And so he became fluent in talking to these guys. And so became the main guy of the Byzantine school. So anyway, the whole thing of, they just, a manuscript here and a manuscript there. And Erasmus just had, 5 manuscripts. If you ask James White, depends which day you ask him, how many manuscripts did Erasmus have? Probably 6. Then you press him, between 6 and 12. How many do you think real? Probably about 20. And then you ask Stephen Boyce, and he's like, between, I think it was like 7 and 10 or something like that. And then you ask Dan Wallace, 5, And the King James is based on 5 manuscripts, It's sort of rubbish. So anyway.
One presumes that means that he thinks there is such a manuscript that has such a reading. But on what basis? Now, he says he's restored it from an old bona fide manuscript. Does he mean that the manuscript had the entire reading? Or does he mean that the manuscript had Kai Ho? and that on the basis of Kai Ho in an old manuscript of good faith, he's restored Kai Ho Esomenos instead of Kai Ho Hosius. Hard to say. Again, Beza doesn't specify.
So it just has the same reading, Kai Ho Osios, and he just changed it and said it was in an ancient manuscript, but it had the older reading in the ancient manuscript. Why would he say he's got the Esomenos reading in an ancient manuscript and it doesn't say it? I mean, this is just this is to me, this looks like desperation. I don't want to be too hard on TurretinFan, but it's just desperation. Why can't you just read it for what it says? And this is one of the main problems I have with modern day text critics, is they don't look at Erasmus and go, yeah, well, he said this and he said that. I'm going to take his word for it unless proven otherwise. But it's like, these guys tend to go, no, well, they said this, said that. Let's just doubt every single thing that's been said. Let's just look at it and just go, no, he probably didn't have a manuscript. No, he's probably not even ever seen the Esomenos reading anywhere. He certainly didn't see it in the Ethiopic, certainly didn't see it in Beatus or Bloodbanner, certainly didn't see it in Hamo Halberstadensis, certainly didn't see it in the name of Jehovah. Why would he do that? And it's like, every part of it is just pulled apart and just doubted upon. Where I don't read Beza like that. I read Beza as if this guy knew what he was doing and that he was being honest. I'm giving the benefit of the doubt and then coming up with the conclusions that I do from that. I can't understand. The only reason that I would think that you would doubt what's being said here is because you have a presupposition, you have a bias, or because James White has influenced you in a certain direction. I just can't understand why you would do that. So anyway,
we don't have any indication of what manuscript, if any, there actually was, what it said, and so we're kind of left speculating about whether and to what extent this is just a mere conjecture. However, more on that, in God willing, in another episode. Let me take a quick note.
So kudos to Jeff Riddle. He pointed out that he had a manuscript. That's exactly what it says. Kudos to Jeff Riddle, because for like the last 200 years, people they were saying that he had a conjectural emendation here. If you had a manuscript, well, it's not a conjectural emendation, is it? And then just going, well, we mightn't know what that manuscript is today because there are many manuscripts that have been lost. 1 million manuscripts just in World War II alone. Now, you've got to be careful that I have a caveat. Just in World War II alone. I'm not saying World War One. The many other wars that have happened throughout Europe, and because there was one stage where TurretinFan was saying, well, this was before World War II. It's like, I'm not just saying just World War II. World War One, many places, libraries, places were destroyed. Museums, even just private collections, burnt to the ground. And that's just, look at all the wars that have happened throughout Europe. Look at the wars in Germany. Look at the wars in France. Look at the wars in Spain. Look at how much stuff has been destroyed. How much stuff that we didn't even know about wasn't catalogued yet. It's just gone. But anyway,
let's do a quick look through the rest of the comments. Let me take me back to this view. Thank you very much, Doki Doki, for your compliment about the debate. Much appreciated. Let's see. Happy All Saints Day to you too, Richard Firks. Let's see. Revelation 16:19, quoting from Psalm 75. Recall? Let's see. Revelation 16:19 says, "And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities and nations fell, and great Babylon came in remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath." Let's see. I don't know. You said maybe Psalm 75? Let's take a quick peek at Psalm 75. It says, "When I receive the congregation, I'll judge uprightly." That does sound similar to 16:5. "But the earth and the pillars thereof are dissolved. I bear up the pillars of it." The dissolution of everything is what 2 Peter seems to talk about. Let's see. "God is the judge. He puts one down, sets up another." Oh, here you go. Verse 8. "For in the hand of the Lord there is a cup, and the wine is red. It's full of mixture, and he pours out the same. The dregs thereof, all the wicked of the earth shall wring them out and drink that." So drink the dregs of the wrath of God. Could be an allusion, or I don't know if it's direct quotation, but it could be an allusion to 75:8. Let's see.
So sorry about the Mickey Mouse voice here, but we're just trying to get through this. And so, yeah, this is where I jump in.
Nick Sarah says it doesn't say he used a collation. I don't know who's the it you're referring to. Nick, it doesn't say he, it says he, let's see what Nick says. This is interesting because Nick is the author of the book. So let's give him priority here. Actually, I was through most of the other comments.
And so if TurretinFan is out there and wants to jump in on the StreamYard, he can jump in. I can give him a link. We can chat if you want, but it might drag these videos on longer, but I think this is going to be something that I'm eternally going to be going over, is the name of Jehovah, Revelation 16:5, and all the rest of it. But at least I'm focusing on the Bible. You know, I know some people, they're doing podcasts on, you know, all sorts of worldly things, and I'm not against all that, but I would just hate to be caught in the political cycle of trying to get people to understand that a woman is a woman, and thinking that that's controversial to say a woman is a woman, and you have to use proper genders and all this. It's like, I just couldn't be bothered with all that. I mean, to me, that's just some sort of fad that's going to probably fade away or just get worse and worse. Unfortunately, it probably will get worse and worse.
Before I get to what Nick said, Richard, Psalm 75 verse 8 would be the verse that's referred to in 16 and 19, and maybe 75:2 would be referred to in 16:5. But coming back to what Nick says it doesn't say he used a collation. He said an old accurate manuscript. So it doesn't say he used a collation, and it doesn't say he had a manuscript. It just says that he restored it from an old bona fide manuscript. Right? Literally a manuscript of good faith. But that's my best take on what good faith means here, is what we would say bona fide, legitimate, an old legitimate manuscript. But how did he get it from a manuscript? Well, we have to learn about how Beza used manuscripts. And when we learn about how Beza used manuscripts, we see that aside from Codex Claromontanus and Codex Bezae, aside from those two that he says he had, and he did indeed have, aside from those, he doesn't claim to have had these other manuscripts. So it's reasonable to assume that these other references to other manuscripts are to other people's collations, in other words, secondhand accounts of manuscripts. Would be nice to know whose collation he's referring to, but he doesn't say. He doesn't say it's his own collation. He doesn't say it's somebody else's collation. He doesn't tell us what this manuscript is, whether it's Greek, Latin, Armenian, Georgian. He doesn't tell us. Presumably it's either Latin or Greek.
Well, clearly he says from good and faithful manuscript that he's restored Esomenos.
And again, he doesn't tell us what reading he found in that manuscript, whether that reading that he found
says Esomenos
is the entire phrase.
It says Esomenos.
Or Esomenos, or just the Kai Ho, which, after all, he says that this article is the thing that clues him in to the fact that there's a corruption here. So he may mean that the old, reliable Greek manuscript has Kai Ho. And indeed, old, reliable manuscripts do have Kai Ho. At least one. I don't remember how many, but at least one pre-10th century manuscript has that. So if that's all he means, then we can agree with him about what the manuscript said. If that's the manuscript he had in mind, whether directly or indirectly. Let's see what else. Other comments, other follow-up. Well, I don't see other comments, other follow-up, but of course, sometimes people are far lagged out behind where I am currently in here. So Psalm 75:4, Richard asks, Psalm 75:4 says, I said unto the fools, deal not foolishly, and to the wicked lift not up the horn. Lift not up your horn on high, speak not with stiff-necked. So I'm not sure what you mean. If you mean to suggest that the horn there that they're lifting on high is a drinking horn, maybe so. I'm not sure, but I don't think that's specifically referred to here. I would think of that probably it's referring to kind of a battle horn, like the helmet. Anyway, let's see. So, well, I appreciate Nick's comment, and I agree that there's no reference to. I can put this back on the screen actually. So I agree that there's no mention anywhere in this comment about a collation, and instead, what's actually said is ex vetusto bonae fidei manuscripto codici.
Yes.
Restitui.
Yes.
So that's the interesting phrase that he uses from an old bona fide manuscript codex. But we don't know what.
And James White has that exact phrase in his book, and he says that means he had no manuscript. It was a conjectural emendation. When it says the opposite. So this is why in my book, I'm like, James White doesn't know anything about what's going on. He might now, because we're talking all about it, but up until the time I wrote this book, he had no idea.
Which manuscript codex it was, whether he got it access to this information about the manuscript codex firsthand or secondhand, he doesn't say. And what we should do in order to get to what he means here, or what he could mean, or what he probably means, is to look at what he says in other places.
And also take his word for it and go, okay, what's the worst case scenario? So, see, to me, TurretinFan fighting against this, it's easier just to go, okay, he said he had an old ancient manuscript with this reading in it. And then just like according to my perspective, it's like, well, that just backs up the fact that, which are and wast and holy, the holy there is, a form of nomina sacra over the holiest name of God, Jehovah. But TurretinFan could just say, okay, well, he had a manuscript, but all the other ones say Sanctus, they all say Osios, they all say holy. So what's one manuscript against, 1,000 or whatever, 300 or whatever it is? He could do that. But he's sort of fighting against just these basic facts. And I guess in a way, like, I don't want to be too hard on TurretinFan, because I have seen him fight against a whole bunch of stuff earlier on in the book that I wrote about Jehovah and I am and the etymology of these two and the relationship to the Triadic declarations and things like that, which now it's coming to light that he's reading the notes of Revelation 1:4, and it's like, okay, now I'm seeing that. And so I guess in a way I don't want to get TurretinFan turned off by me just being like, what, you can't see it, you're a dummy, sort of thing, where it took me a long time to see it. It took me a lot of study to see it. But and I guess in a way, because I feel like I've put it on a silver platter and I'm serving it up, people are putting it in their mouth and going, it's dog food. And I'm like, it's not dog food. Just chew it. Just think about it. Just, and so I guess most of it is probably just my own frustration that people aren't getting it. A lot of people are, though. Like even yesterday, I had an email, someone just saying, just thank you so much for your material on Revelation 16:5. It cleared that issue up completely for me. Now I know it's the name of God. Now I know that it's the name of Jehovah expanded. It just makes so much sense. It makes the scriptures harmonized. Thanks for doing that. And so I get those type of things all the time from Textus Receptus people, King James people. And I really feel like, I really feel like I'm content in my study on that, and what I've examined is enough for me personally to go, 100%, I would defend that reading. I mean, I do debates on it, so obviously I believe it. But, I mightn't be the best teacher in the world. I mightn't be able to serve it up the best, but I think if you just, if you can't see the forest through the trees, it's like, well, just keep looking, you'll see it, it'll come. And that's what I'm saying with TurretinFan. The lights are coming on. I remember I used to work with some guys who were atheists, or they were claiming they're atheists. They're more so agnostic, I guess. But they were saying evolution was true, and I was like, no, young earth creationism. And so I was pushing them in that direction. And they were just against me and anti everything that I was saying. But looking back, they were actually pushing, because that's how they were getting more information. The more they pushed my buttons, the more I would get like mad at their opinions and just say a whole bunch of stuff, or go home and study it that night and come back the next day with stuff. And I remember I went away for a while, for like a year or so, and I came back and they'd actually gone, well, we actually don't believe in evolution anymore. And I'm like, But because they were always fighting against it, I actually thought that they were anti. And so, I'm just thinking, these guys have no care whatsoever about God or about the truth or about facts, but they actually did. But they were just, and that's one thing I've learned. If you throw a rock and someone is yelling, or the dog that yelps the most is the one that got hit by that rock. And so I've thrown out rocks of truth here. There are a few people who have been hit by this rock, and sometimes it might take a little while for the yelping to die down. But I think TurretinFan has been hit by a rock of truth in this, and that he knows he can't unsee this now. As far as I'm concerned, I think more and more manuscripts will come to light concerning this issue. I think we're still back in the 1950s, especially with what we're doing with Google and even with AI. I mean, AI is not as accurate as we think it is. But I think it's going to get better and better, and collations are going to get better and better, and we're going to see a few little markings here and there, a few commentaries here and there. There's going to be, in 5 years, it's going to be double the amount of information that we've probably got now. Probably not manuscripts, but just information on these issues. I mean, look, in the last 10 years, how much just this one issue has quadrupled. And there's so many other issues that like, Maurice Robinson, James Snape Jr., these guys are doing a whole bunch of other stuff on the majority text, which most of the time is King James issues, TR issues as well. But anyway, let's continue. We've got 3 minutes to go, and then we'll just quickly jump on the other video and start that.
In his work in the New Testament, and that will have to wait for a further. They'll have to wait for a further video, I suppose. I don't want to overburden this one video with more than it can bear, but I do want to address this one issue. So anyway, thank you, Nick, for commenting. Thanks as well to Richard and to Doki Doki Bible Club. I appreciate your comments and feedback, and I look forward to at least one more video specifically talking about Beza and trying to get behind this reference to the old reliable or old accurate or old bona fide manuscript codex that Beza's argument is based on. Now, as I said, we don't know what the reading is that he restored it on the basis of. Is he restoring on the basis of the old reliable one saying the Kai Ho, and that's the basis he has in mind? Or does he mean that he actually found those very words, hoesomnos, in some old manuscript? Certainly, people have taken him as suggesting that he found those words, hoesomnos, in an old manuscript. And how he found it in the manuscript, do you mean first-hand or second-hand? Because no one else has found such a manuscript, people seem to have kind of defaulted to suggesting that he had it personally. He doesn't say he had the manuscript. He doesn't say he owned the manuscript or he was looking at the manuscript. And he certainly doesn't identify the manuscript in any way. And we'll see, God willing, in the next video, why calling it an old manuscript doesn't really tell us anything. Because, I mean, the too long didn't listen to the next episode, is that Beza had no way of knowing which ones are especially old compared to other.
Yeah, he had no way, even though he had codex Beza and 5th century manuscript, he didn't know what old manuscripts were. This is all just speculation. So anyway,
the ones that are also old, so they basically all become old manuscripts for Beza. So anyway, we will, I guess, leave that here for now. And I do appreciate all the people who stopped by, commented, and I hope that God will be with you.
Okay, so let's go to part 20. Okay, so we just did that one for the second time. How annoying was that? Anyway, sorry guys. Now let's go to part 20. Now this is where because I do remember this. So this is where I guess I'm a little bit stuck. I'm in this loop where I know that I've actually responded to the earlier videos.
Doesn't have the epsilon at the end? I don't know. Nick,
what I'll do is I'll grab.
He kind of goes through his own materials. Sorry to talk over him a bit. But he kind of goes through his own materials. I'll let him play a little bit here. We'll come back in a second after he's gone through it.
Quick Google search. And okay, so he has Java. Do I have Java? Yeah, I've got Java there.
Yeah, that's not the issue though. The issue is the Greek.
Yeah, so this is the problem. And see, last time what happened was I finished that, then I did like 26 minutes of this video. I don't know which video that is. Maybe I've not labeled it. Maybe it got deleted. Because I've just gone to the latest video, and Where are we? Not standing for truth. TurretinFan. I think maybe it's the way that Google set things up. Maybe I just clicked on part 19 and just started running with it instead of going to the live ones. So that's the one playing. But yeah, with my own videos. So number 25 in yeah, but that's sort of stuck there. But that's definitely, well, that's number 19. So I think what's happened is I did repeat one. So I'm really sorry about that. So we are at Gregory of Nyssa. So I've already done all this. I'm just in this eternal loop of response videos. So please forgive my, what was that fish's name on Nemo? Dory moment where I've just swum around the bowl and lost my memory. So let's get rid of that. And let's start on the Gregory of Nyssa stuff. So
Revelation 16, just as this one also doesn't have any clear connection to Revelation 16. What about number 3 on my list, Cyril of Alexandria? This is from his commentary on Isaiah, book 4, oration 2, at Isaiah 44, 6 through 7. This was quite interesting, and I thought something that might be of interest to Nick. I don't recall it coming up in his book, although perhaps it did and I forgot. But you'll notice here he talks about God, and he says, "For God is the beginning of everything, being himself without beginning, and everything was brought forth by him into being. He then became under no one, but is, was, and will be. For this is his name, and an eternal memorial for generations of generations." So I don't know, from my 50 cents, this is one of those quotations that should belong in Nick's book, because it's talking about his name and it being is, was, and will be is mentioned here. The challenge, of course, is that it's similar, but it's not quite the same in the Greek as, well, in the English it looks quite similar, but in the Greek it's not quite the same as, for example, there's no articles, it's actually verbs in some of these cases. It's a bit different from what the Greek actually has at Revelation 16:5 in Beza's edition. So again, it's a possible illusion. But in terms of establishing Nick's case, remember in his possible illusions chapter, he was also talking about ones that connect this is, was, and will be to the name of God. This would seem like a strong argument to make. Maybe he would look for a better translation of this Greek. There is Robert Hill, I think, has a translation. I didn't consult for this, but Robert Hill's translation might be a little bit better. On the other hand, maybe Robert Hill's translation will be less helpful. I'm not sure, but at least it's something to consider. And I think in any event, for this is his name, I don't think that's going to be much different, because you can see that this onomauton is there. I'm not sure how else you're going to get around this. I think that's significant to the point that Cyril of Alexandria, 5th century author, is making in this commentary. Now, it's a possible allusion to Revelation 16:5, but that possibility, as I said, it's a very remote possibility, but I can't completely rule it out. So we just put it in possible illusion category. So far, we just have these 3. So we have, as I said, Clement of Alexandria, Gregory of Nyssa, and now Cyril of Alexandria. Moving on to our 4th, we have a very interesting one, Olympiodorus, the deacon. I'm pretty sure that this is not in Nick's book. And here we see an interesting text. It says Josedek or Yosedek, and Yosedek is interpreted as Yao, the righteous, which means our righteousness, or Yao, meaning being and becoming. Josedek, and because of the similarity in name, it refers to these other people. Now, some of the rest of this is a little bit of a mistake. It's stemming from the Septuagint translation of Jeremiah. This is a commentary on Jeremiah. It's stemming from the Septuagint translation, which has Kyrios Yosedek, which is, whereas the actual Hebrew has Yahweh Tzidkenu, which is from the Zedek, the ZDK triliteral. But in any event, the point is the Lord our righteousness is the King James Version's translation. You can see it's quite similar to what Olympiodorus has once he kind of explicates it. But interestingly, not only is this shortened form of Yahweh here, but the meaning of Yahweh is given as being and becoming, which is generally supportive of Nick's point about the meaning of the name Yahweh. It's another case to possibly be included, although hardly anyone's ever heard of Olympiodorus the Deacon. He's not a super popular author. Maybe that would be why Nick wouldn't include him. Also, there's some question. I think it's the beginning of the 6th century is when he wrote, but I'm not 100% sure about that. There is actually a more recent text of this, and also probably a better translation out there somewhere, but I didn't get a chance to consult it in preparation for this episode. Just letting you know it's out there. Let's see. So the bottom line is, could it be a reference to Revelation 16? I mean, I think it's pretty unlikely, because he's explicitly saying that this is just the meaning of the word. So, yeah, but could it be? I suppose it could be. And I should have made a note here as well. A possible allusion, maybe. That's the most you could say for it. And the same thing with this next one. It's also a possible allusion. Number 5, Euthemius Protasecretus. So, which is an ecclesiastical office. I'm not sure the best way. Chief secretary? I don't know. I'm not sure that's quite right. In any event, he's a 10th century, I think, author. And he says, for me to live is Christ, who is all in all, both now and forever, and to die is eternal, undying gain. But you'll notice that in that process of what's here translated as both now and forever, the now is the kaion, and forever is the kai somenos. So you have this kind of interesting possible allusion to Revelation 16:5, if indeed there was such a version floating around at that time, which I don't think there was. But if there were, this is a possible allusion to it. Although the primary focus of this allusion is to Philippians 1:21, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. And you can see quite a lot of similarity between the Greek words that are used here come from Philippians 1:21. And then all in all could be taken from Ephesians 1:23 or 1 Corinthians 15:28. The now and always is similar in concept to 2 Peter 3:18 or Jude 25. But again, it could be possibly an allusion here to Revelation 16:5. There were some other ones that are not really relevant at all to Nick's point, just something I thought was interesting. One was John Climacus, a 7th century author, who says, I'm wholly united with God and always will be. So he has this am and always will be, this version of, this is the always will be concept. So it has the asomenos and the ai, or to make it eternally, always, and then it's connected with the word God. But, it is him having union with God, God being now and forever, but I think it's not even enough here to say that it's even a possible allusion to Revelation 16:5. But somebody might disagree. So because it's beautiful and just to be thorough, I've included it. And then there's this interesting grammar, a Greek grammar from the early 15th.
So I actually really appreciate a lot of this. I'll go through and throw a lot of this into my website so people can examine these things more and more. But this is great. This is the sort of thing that I was doing, just going through and seeing, is asomenos in a reading, where does it appear? I was also looking up eris futurus in Latin and a whole bunch of other things. And so,
century where
so that's why I'm just letting this run. I mean, I think this is, some of this is support for what we're doing.
English translation is now interspersed. The original is just Greek. But you can see it's talking about participles, and it gives the being, haon, or haontes, of the being, and then the same for the feminine and neuter, and then for the future, ha esomenos, or to such and such menu, the one who will be, or of the will being one. It's a little bit hard to say, but of the one who will be, or of or the one who will be, something like that. So, and then there's also feminine versions as well, and neuter also. So that's all very interesting. And then finally, just a kind of interesting exposition on the Psalms. Psalm 40 in the Septuagint, 41:10 for us. And here it talks about himself as himself existing, the judge of all and understood as God. And it does have hotos esomenos, this idea of him having this continuing existence is discussed here. Again, I don't think that's even possibly an illusion, but still of some interest, I suppose. So that brings me up to, I see there was in the current one we're looking at, there was something he said around 2 hours and 1 minute I wanted to address. So I'll jump in around 2 hours and let's play what he has to say.
I didn't write that. I've just gone, okay, Clement of Alexandria, he's said kai ho esomenos, which means and shall be, which is exactly the King James reading, exactly the Textus Receptus reading. Whether he's saying it for Revelation 16:5, I'm not saying whether he is, whether he isn't, but it just so happens to be the exact reading. Okay. Which is important. And he's saying that it's related to the name of Jehovah. So all the way through, when I'm saying, if you expand the name of Jehovah, it means this, well, he's an early church writer just saying the basically what I'm saying.
So I think we're in basic agreement on that point, Nick. I'm not sure. That's not the issue that separates us, I don't think. Certainly there are a lot of church writers who have that idea. Now,
so again, sorry about this sound there, because I have to turn it up to hear my voice because it's very low on TurretinFan's audio. And so I'm turning mine right up and then trying to turn it back low before TurretinFan just blows your ears off. So I know it makes for lousy listening, but it's just the way it is at the moment.
You say expand or something like that. That might be the difference. Here he just says it's interpreted or it's explained or the meaning is. You say expand, maybe it's a potato thing. I'm not sure. I don't know that it's just a potato thing, but I don't suspect there's any meaningful difference between us on that point. Let's end up part 14. My responses in part 14. Part 15, let's see. I do have something to discuss at part. Let's see if I can paste and go.
And so book 1, section 1 to book 1, section 5. 1.1 to 1.1. 1 to 1.5. Okay, so it's clearly there, and so Internet Archive. So let's have a look at this.
Usually I can expand this to make it like full screen.
Loading up, so we'll just go down. Notes on the history of the.
We're going to try reloading it.
And so book 1, section 1 to book 1, section 5.
There we go.
1.1 to 1.5. Okay, so it's clearly there. And so Internet Archive. So let's have a look at this. Looks like a PDF loading up. So we'll just go down. Notes on the history of the Vulgate Gospels. So here we have Et Futura Est there again. The witness of God is greater. (1906) Et Futura Est. Polymath Visual Library Et Futura Est. So Et Futura Est seems to be in a lot of different websites. You know, I'm not going to go through all these right now, but it's like I just think what he's reading there with is to come is just simply the wrong reading.
So you'll notice that what Nick has singled out here is this issue about is to come is the wrong reading. What I think he means would be something like wrong translation, but I will just point out, here's this another article, which I also posted today, not tomorrow the 11th. For some reason, this is how it goes. I think it has to do with being on universal time with Great Britain's time or something like that. So in any event, can the Latin word futurus sometimes be a translation of to come? Interestingly, the answer is that it depends on context. So here is the Ordo Vocabularum Alphabetico Ordine from 1532. And you can see it has futurus, as well as futura and futurum, as to come or to be. And so that's one example of an authority translating futurus as to come. Also here in the works of John Owen, and I thought this might be of particular interest to Nick as well, talking about Revelation 1:8, I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, says the Lord, which is and which was and which is to come, the Almighty, to which is added that of chapter 4:8, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, which was and is to come. What sayest thou to this? Answer, this place, they say, refer to Christ, because they suppose none is said to come, but only Christ, for he is to come to judge the quick and dead. But it is to be noted that the word which they have rendered to come may equally be rendered is to be. Equally rendered is to be, as at John 16:13, where the Lord, but we'll come back to that in a second. So I just want to make a note to myself to come back to that, otherwise I'll forget. John 16:13. So, and then you see in this the Latin down here, and you'll see that the which is to come is futurus est here. So Apocalypse 1:45, we read, grace to you and peace from him which is and which was and which is to come, and from the seven spirits, etc., etc.
So that would probably be where Wordsworth was pointing out that at times it does have futurus est, which means will be or shall be.
So you can see that this, and then again, the futurus est is the second time here. Now you notice here that it is venturus, which is to come, which is a more explicit way to say is to come than futurus. Futurus can mean is to be, as Owen puts it here, can be equally rendered is to be. So his reference to John 16:13, you'll notice that there is an erchomena in John 16:13, and the Authorized Version has it this way: howbeit, when he, the Spirit of truth, is come, he will guide you into all truth, for he shall not speak of himself, but whatsoever he shall hear, he shall speak. And he will show you things to come. And you'll notice that there, the things to come is expressed in terms of a form of erchomena, ta erchomena. So this might or might not be significant to our discussion And the reason why is, I don't know, pretty straightforward, I think. Let me share this tab instead, just so you can see. So he will show you things to come, but you'll see that the to come, and the Erechomena here is things to come. You can see it's inflected form, things to come, and it's a this. So this, the point that Owen is making is this can also be translated the things to be. The fact that it's Erechomena doesn't necessarily imply that things are arriving.
Or maybe when it's talking about a living being, it might have that one is to come. When it's talking about an object, maybe it's to be. And so I think there's a clear distinction between, is to come in the 4 previous triadic declarations and the shall be. I mean, it's very clear. To me, saying that these are synonyms, I just don't see that.
So the Erechomena does not necessarily mean that it has to be talking specifically about the coming of Jesus Christ. And that's John Owen's argument, which is a resourceful argument. And unfortunately for Nick, it cuts against Nick's and Beza's point and argument at Revelation 16:5. Because the more natural way to, if this was a trilogy, which was and is to come, is this trilogy that represents God.
It's not representing God, it's the etymology of God. So it can only mean like those things. It's not like you can just go, and he's full of truth, in the middle of it. It's like, that's true that he is full of truth, but it's like his etymology of Jehovah is, is, was, and shall be, which is the etymology stemming from I am. And so these come from Haya, Hava, and Revelation 16:5 perfectly expounds that.
And represents the idea of God's timelessness. A similar point to the point raised by the name of God, Yahweh or Jehovah, if that's the intent, and if Erechomena can mean which is to come and which is to be, not only coming in the sense like Jesus is coming on the clouds, but it can also mean coming, meaning just what's coming in the future, then, and interestingly, Futurus has that same sense. Futurus can mean which is coming in the future, also can just mean what is going to be in the future. So, as opposed to Venturus, which doesn't tend to have that same sense to it. But let's see. Let's come back here. So that's an interesting observation by John Owen. And then here's a fascinating piece, a commentary on the Apocalypse by Moses Stewart. I don't know his overall orthodoxy or anything like that, but actually I don't need to do that version. I just need this version. Here we go. So you can see that this is talking about the text. It's talking about the...
I think at the end of the day, it's just on 11 o'clock here at night, and so I'm going to bail. And I think this looks like a more interesting one to go through, this one that's on the screen. And so, but I'm pretty sure that is just explaining Revelation chapter 1, verse 4. And so where at times they do say, to be, that's the name of Jehovah, and I am and that I am, that's the name of God, and that's the etymology of Jehovah, where when they're looking at Erechomena, that is the expansion of the name of Jehovah, but it is talking about an event. And so I've brought this up quite a few times, where we have the one which is present tense, was past tense, and is to come. So that's an event that's going to happen at the second coming of Christ. And so that is a special event, where shall be is not an event. It is just the being and the existence of God. God shall be forever. And so, I mean, you can turn up somewhere, you can who was and is to come, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you abide forever. And so I think that's what people have been pointing out in Revelation 1:4, that there seems to be this change from the eternal existence of God to an actual event, a second coming. And so, but we know from other scriptures that this is the beginning of the millennium, and then eventually after the millennium, the great white throne judgment, and then a new heaven and a new earth wherein righteousness dwells, and hell and death are thrown into the lake of fire. So anyway, I'm going to leave it there, because I'm starting to close my eyes and sort of wish that this video would go away. So just being honest with you. But we're at let's get this correctly. Part 20 of question mark, the 46.31 minute mark. So I'm not sure. I did have a video, probably 2 videos back, where I was going through something and a pop-up came up which looked like a girly, porno sort of thing. And I quickly turned it off, and I was going to go back and delete that. And I'm wondering if that video got deleted. And so anyway, I'm going to turn this off. Thanks for joining us, guys. God bless you. And we'll see you next time.